My name is Caitlin. I'm 42 years old, living a quiet suburban life just outside Minneapolis with my husband, Brandon. On paper, I'm nothing more than a full-time housewife, the kind who bakes on weekends, keeps the house tidy, and smiles politely at neighborhood gatherings. But that's only half the truth. Behind that calm, domestic facade, I'm the CEO of a medical equipment distribution company that generates millions in annual revenue. My personal income sits around $145,000 a year, a detail I've kept entirely to myself. Brandon has never had a clue. We met when I had just turned 30, at a close friend's small get-together. Brandon, back then, was everything a woman could hope for: warm, attentive, charming. He noticed the smallest things, the way I always held my coffee cup in my left hand, the spark in my eyes when my favorite song played in the background. Those details made me feel seen, truly seen. I remember thinking, if I could spend my life with someone like this, I'd never need anything else. We married a year later, and for a while, it felt like I had found my forever happiness. But that illusion slowly began to crumble when Brandon started revealing a very different side of himself. He stopped trying, first subtly, then completely. Whenever I encouraged him to explore better job opportunities, he dismissed the idea with practiced excuses. His salary barely covered our basic expenses, yet he seemed oddly content, unwilling to aim for more. When I gently offered suggestions, he grew defensive. Once, he even snapped. "Don't try to make me live by your standards, Caitlin. I'm not your employee." I told myself he was just proud, that maybe he needed time. When a position opened at my company, a simple administrative role requiring little more than professionalism and good communication, I saw it as a perfect chance for him to rebuild some confidence. The pay was more than double his current salary. I even asked the head of HR to keep the position open just for him. But when I finally told Brandon, his face hardened. "You think I'm that useless," he said coldly. "That I need my wife to hand me a job? Don't meddle in my business." That was the moment I realized something fundamental had shifted. The attentive man who once noticed the way I held my coffee cup now couldn't even see what was right in front of him, a wife who wasn't trying to control him, only to help him stand taller beside her. I was stunned. How could the man who once claimed to love me so deeply now treat my sincere concern like an insult? His stubbornness was something I could never quite understand. Still, I tried to endure it. I told myself that if I worked hard enough, if I could at least keep our lives stable, then somehow, things would eventually fall back into place. Every month, I quietly deposited $1,400 into Brandon's account as a living allowance. He would burn through it in less than 2 weeks, then start texting me endless complaints about the cost of groceries, gas, and how life was just too stressful. I said nothing. Not because I didn't know where the money was going. His growing sneaker collection and late-night online gaming purchases made that obvious, but because I was too emotionally drained to argue anymore. It wasn't about the money. Not really. What hurt the most was his indifference. He never once asked if I was tired after another long workday, or noticed when I stayed up until 2 a.m. answering client emails, or when I had to fly between 2 cities in the same week. In Brandon's eyes, I was still the housewife he was generously supporting, while he believed he was the one keeping our household afloat. The irony was almost cruel. I'll never forget the day my mother came over to help around the house. I had been locked in back-to-back online meetings all morning, my laptop balanced on the kitchen counter while she quietly folded laundry and wiped the counters. When Brandon came home that evening, he tossed his keys onto the table, looked around, and said coldly, "Another stranger in the house again. I need my peace and quiet." My mother froze, her hands still clutching a dish towel. I stood up, my pulse racing, and said through clenched teeth, "She's not a stranger, Brandon. She came here to help us, not to be disrespected like that." He barely glanced at me. "That's how you see it," he replied. "But I have a right to feel uncomfortable in my own house." I turned away before he could see the tears forming in my eyes. That was the first moment I felt something inside me crack, a fracture I instinctively knew would never fully heal. After that day, an uneasy silence settled over our home. We still shared the same roof, sat at the same dinner table, sometimes even watched the same TV shows. But every conversation felt forced, every smile hollow. The warmth that once filled our home had drained away, leaving behind only the echo of what our love used to be. There were no more random hugs, no more soft good night whispers before bed, just two people sharing a house, existing side by side as if the bond between us had long since dried up and hardened into nothing but routine. Brandon had grown irritable, almost impossible to please. He'd snap over the smallest things, the towel not folded the way he liked, the TV remote left on the coffee table instead of the armrest, the coffee machine breaking down even though he was the last one to use it. It was as if I had become the scapegoat for everything wrong in his life. I started to feel less like a wife and more like a maid living under the same roof with her employer, an employer who found fault in every breath she took. One evening, after a particularly tense meeting at work, I walked into the house, still wearing my heels, when I heard his voice from the kitchen. He was holding up one of his shirts, irritation etched across his face. "This shirt isn't even ironed," he snapped. "Do you ever do anything right?" For a moment, I just stared at him, too tired to respond. Then I let out a hollow laugh, a sound that didn't even feel like mine. I used to be the woman who pitched to major clients, negotiated multi-million-dollar contracts, and ran a company that other executives envied. Now I was being scolded over a wrinkled shirt. I didn't reply. I had learned that the more I spoke, the more he twisted my words, turning every conversation into a battlefield. Every attempt to reason with him only ended with me feeling smaller, weaker, more exhausted than before. My body was fine. But my spirit, it was wearing thin. I remember one winter afternoon when I came down with the flu. My temperature spiked so high that I could barely lift my head from the pillow. Brandon knew I was sick. He could see the medicine on my nightstand and the cold compress beside me. But instead of bringing me water or asking how I was, he stood in the doorway, arms crossed, and said flatly, "Hurry up and get better. I don't have time to take care of you." I hadn't expected him to hover or fuss, but those words, they cut through me like ice. That wasn't something a husband said to his wife. That was something a stranger would say to someone they were forced to tolerate. From that day on, the loneliness grew unbearable. I felt trapped in a life that no longer felt like mine. And sometimes, late at night, I'd find myself staring at our wedding photo, the one where he was holding my hand and promising to walk through life with me, and I couldn't help but wonder. When did the man who once vowed to protect my heart become the one who broke it the most? I began having restless nights, waking up in the dark with my heart pounding, my mind caught in the same question over and over. Why am I still here? Why was I, a woman who had built her own success, overcome countless challenges, and led people with confidence, allowing myself to remain in a relationship that was slowly breaking me? I told no one. Not even my mother, Frances, who had always treated me like her most precious treasure. She called often, her voice full of concern, asking how I was doing. I always said the same thing, "Everything's fine, Mom." I didn't want her to worry. I didn't want anyone to see my weakness. But I never imagined that Brandon would one day drag her into this mess in the worst possible way. It happened on a Saturday afternoon. My mother came over, her arms full of kindness, my favorite homemade stew, and a basket of fresh fruit she'd bought from the morning market. We were sitting at the dining table, chatting softly, when Brandon walked through the door. He stopped, glanced at my mother, and let out an exaggerated sigh, the kind that carried more contempt than words ever could. Then he dropped his bag onto the couch and muttered, "Again? There's always someone sitting around this house." My mother froze for a second but quickly forced a gentle smile. Her voice was calm, even kind. "I'm just dropping by to see my daughter for a bit. I'm not intruding." Brandon didn't even look at her. He opened the fridge, grabbed a drink, and said coldly, "I just don't like having dinner with outsiders. Some people don't know how to respect boundaries." The words hung in the air, thick and cutting. I felt my chest tighten. My mother hesitated, her hand still resting on the edge of the table. After a long pause, she placed the bowl of stew down quietly and turned to me with soft eyes. "I think I should go, sweetheart," she said gently. "I'll come by another time." Her voice trembled just enough for me to hear the pain she was trying to hide. I walked her to the door, my heart sinking with every step. When the door closed behind her, I turned back toward Brandon. My voice shook, but I didn't hold back anymore. "Do you realize how hurtful you're being?" He didn't even flinch. His tone was calm, dismissive, almost bored. "I'm just being honest. If you can't handle that, that's your problem." For a long moment, I stood there in the kitchen, surrounded by the smell of the stew my mother had made and the bitter silence that now filled the house. It hit me then, this place, once filled with warmth and laughter, now felt cold, empty, and unfamiliar. Everything I had built, everything I had tried to protect, was falling apart, piece by piece. At that moment, I had no idea that just a few weeks later, something would happen that would change everything, and in my most vulnerable state, Brandon's true colors would finally come into full view. I don't remember the exact moment I collapsed. One minute, I was standing in the conference room beneath the pale glare of the office lights, the next, everything began to blur and tilt. The sound of voices faded, the floor rushed up toward me, and then, darkness. When I opened my eyes, I was lying in a hospital bed in the emergency wing of Mayo Clinic. The white ceiling above me felt distant and cold. And four dripped steadily beside me, and my body felt like it had just weathered a storm. The doctor's voice was calm but grave. "You fainted from prolonged exhaustion," he said. "We'll need to run more tests. Some of your readings look unusual." At the time, I brushed it off. I'd always been strong, used to long hours, constant pressure, and travel that blurred the days together. I told myself a few nights of rest would fix everything. But 2 days later, I was called into a private room. The doctor sat across from me, hands folded, eyes steady. "We found a tumor in your pancreas," he said quietly. "Fortunately, we caught it early. But you'll need to begin treatment right away. This won't be easy." His words hung in the air like heavy smoke. I heard them, but it was as if I were listening from far away. The edges of the room blurred, and for a moment, I couldn't feel the ground beneath my feet. It wasn't fear of dying that gripped me. It was the fear of facing it alone. That night, lying in the hospital bed under the sterile hum of machines, I texted Brandon. "I'm in the hospital. I need to talk." No reply. I called. The phone rang once, twice, then went to voicemail. Not a single message. Not one word of concern. So I began treatment without him. The infusions left me weak, my veins sore and bruised. My taste buds dulled until everything I ate tasted like metal. My hair began to fall out in uneven strands that tangled between my fingers. Every time I caught my reflection in the mirror, I saw a stranger, frail, pale, but still with eyes that refused to dim. I kept fighting. Not just for survival but for something deeper, for closure, for clarity, for the part of me that still couldn't understand how love could decay so completely. For 2 long weeks, I fought alone inside that hospital room, with no family beside me, no familiar voice offering comfort. I lied to my mother, Frances, telling her I was away on a business trip so she wouldn't worry. Then, on a Thursday afternoon, just as I was drifting in and out of sleep, the door opened. And there he was. For a moment, I honestly thought I was dreaming. He stood in the doorway of my hospital room, hands tucked into his pockets, eyes as cold as the sterile walls around us. "You're here," I said softly, my voice weak from exhaustion. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he walked in, the sound of his shoes sharp against the tile floor, and placed a folder on the bedside table. When he finally spoke, his tone was detached, the voice of a man negotiating a deal, not talking to his wife. "I've filed for divorce," he said. "The house and the car will be in my name. I think that's fair. As for you..." He paused, eyes flicking briefly to the 4 in my arm. "I'm not even sure how long you'll be around." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Not because he was leaving, some part of me had already known that day would come, but because of the cold, mechanical cruelty behind his words. He hadn't come to see if I was all right. He came to collect what he thought was his. To claim his share before I was gone. It was as if he saw me not as his wife, not even as a person, but as a fading asset, something whose value was about to expire. I pressed my lips together, forcing the storm inside me to stay hidden. I refused to let him see me break. When I finally spoke, my voice was steady, eerily calm. "Pick whatever you want," I said quietly. "Thank you for coming." For the first time, he hesitated. Maybe he expected a breakdown, a scene, tears, something he could use to feel superior. But when all he got was silence, his expression flickered with confusion. Then he shrugged, turned toward the door, and muttered over his shoulder. "Not like you have a choice anyway." When the door clicked shut behind him, the room felt heavier for a moment, then strangely lighter. I didn't cry. Instead, a cold, deliberate smile curved at the corners of my lips. You just woke up the real me, Brandon, I whispered. And soon, you'll realize you made the biggest mistake of your life. I reached for the bedside phone and dialed the only person I trusted completely, Eric, my chief financial officer. For years, he had been my silent ally, loyal, discreet, and one of the few people who truly understood how much power I actually held. When he answered, his tone was steady but cautious. Caitlin. Eric, I said, my voice calm and measured. I need your help with something. There was a brief pause on the line, then his voice came back, firm and certain. I've been waiting for this call. Just say the word. I closed my eyes, leaning back against the pillow, feeling the last traces of weakness slip away. Sunlight filtered softly through the hospital curtains, painting faint golden lines across the white sheets. For the first time in years, I felt peaceful. Because I had finally decided to let Brandon go. But not in the way he thought. He wanted to discard me at my weakest. Fine. But in that moment, as I lay there in that sterile hospital room, I realized something profound. I wasn't the one who needed to be set free. It was him. From the life I had built, carried, and protected for years, a life he never even knew I was holding together. 3 days after that cold hospital visit, Eric came to see me. He didn't bring flowers or sympathy. Just a leather briefcase, sleek and understated, which he set carefully on the table beside my bed. He looked at me with a mix of concern and respect. Are you sure you want to go through with this plan? I met his gaze, steady and unflinching. Yes, I said. And I want everything to start tomorrow. He gave a small nod. He understood exactly what that meant. Eric was the only person who knew the full truth. That I had registered my company under my mother's name, keeping my own identity completely hidden. I'd wanted a modest life, one where Brandon could feel secure, where my success didn't threaten his fragile pride. Looking back now, I realized I hadn't just been kind. I'd been naive. The next morning, I signed a termination letter, a simple, 2-page document ending the supply agreement between my company and Vital Tech, where Brandon worked in the logistics department. That contract wasn't just important, it was Vital Tech's lifeline, accounting for over 60% of their total revenue in the previous quarter. And the cruel twist. It had been Brandon's deal. I remembered the day he came home, grinning from ear to ear, chest puffed with pride. You wouldn't believe it, Caitlin, he'd said. I just secured one of the biggest contracts in the company's history. I had smiled, listening to him boast about how his strategic charm and negotiation skills had sealed the deal, never once realizing that the major partner he was so proud of impressing was me, sitting quietly just a bedroom wall away. Now, one signature from me would erase it all. At 8 a.m. on Monday, the termination letter was sent out. By 3 p.m., my phone rang. It was Mr. Peterson, the CEO of Vital Tech. His tone was strained, formal but nervous. Mrs. Francis, he said, referring to the legal name on the documents, we're quite surprised by this decision. If possible, we'd like to know the reason. I took a slow breath, keeping my voice calm and professional. I've been made aware, I said evenly, that one of your employees has demonstrated inappropriate behavior, disrespect toward female colleagues, and indications of misusing company assets. As a major partner, I cannot condone that. There was silence on the line. I could almost hear the weight of those words settling on him, the beginning of the unraveling. As I hung up the phone, a quiet satisfaction pulsed through me. This wasn't revenge born of hatred. It was accountability. Brandon had chosen to treat me like I was disposable. Now he would finally learn what it felt like to lose something truly valuable. Not because I destroyed it, but because he did. There was a long pause on the other end of the line before Mr. Peterson asked, his tone cautious. What's the name of that employee? I didn't hesitate. Brandon Scott, I said simply. The silence that followed was almost satisfying. That afternoon, Brandon came home late, looking pale and hollow-eyed. He moved around the house like a man walking through the wreckage of his own making. He had no idea that, just hours earlier, my lawyer had sent out a counter-divorce filing, this time with a clause requiring him to vacate the house within 30 days. The same house, by the way, that I had bought. His name was only ever there because my prideful husband needed to feel like a man. Brandon opened the refrigerator, grabbed a bottle of water, and stood there for a long moment before finally breaking the silence. "I got laid off," he said softly, almost like he was still trying to process it himself. I didn't look up right away. I finished the sentence in my book, placed the bookmark carefully between the pages, and set it aside. "I know," I said evenly. He turned to face me, confusion and disbelief flickering in his eyes. How do you know?" I stood, walked to the desk, and opened the top drawer. Inside was a cream-colored envelope, clean, sharp-edged, deliberate. I set it on the table between us, my voice calm and deliberate. "Because I'm the one who ended that contract." He froze, his expression twisting. "What are you talking about?" "I'm the CEO of Silver Med, Brandon," I said, each word deliberate, cutting. "The company you bragged about winning over. The one you claimed you single-handedly convinced to sign the biggest deal of your career." His mouth fell open, but no words came out. The realization dawned on his face slowly, painfully. I didn't stop. For years, I paid every bill. I cleared your credit card debt. I covered your cousin's hospital expenses, paid your nephew's tuition. I even transferred $1,500 to your account every month, because I believed in love, Brandon. Because I thought marriage meant partnership. His breathing quickened. He looked like the floor had just disappeared beneath him. This can't be real," he stammered, reaching for the envelope. I tilted my head slightly, watching him fumble it open with trembling hands. "It's very real," I said quietly. "Those are the divorce papers, the asset division terms, and your meeting schedule with my lawyer. You'll find it's all very fair." He looked up at me then, his face pale, eyes wide with disbelief. The same man who once stood in my hospital room with ice in his veins now looked utterly defeated. I met his gaze one last time and said softly, "You told me I didn't have a choice, remember? Now it's your turn." And with that, I turned away, leaving him standing there in the silence he had once so easily given me. "You have 30 days to move out," I said evenly. "And the $3,200 mortgage payment. I won't be covering that anymore." For a moment, he just stood there, silent, stunned. The words seemed to hang in the air like shards of glass, sharp and impossible to ignore. The same man who once walked through this house like he owned it now looked like a stranger surrounded by a life he couldn't afford. I turned away before he could answer. I didn't need to see the look on his face. There was no hatred in my heart anymore, just clarity. Brandon had lived too long in the shadow I built, cushioned by comfort, by illusions of power that were never truly his. Now he would have to face what life looked like without me holding it up for him. 3 days later, the official divorce papers were delivered. And that night, close to midnight, in the dim hospital room, where I was fighting through my second round of chemotherapy, the phone rang. I almost ignored it. But then I saw his name glowing faintly on the screen. Brandon. I already knew what that meant. The panic had begun. "Caitlin, please, just hear me out," he started, his voice trembling, raw, broken, nothing like the man who once stood in front of me with arrogance burning in his eyes. I said nothing. Just placed the phone on speaker, leaned back against my pillow, and closed my eyes. The chemo left my body heavy, my mind fogged, but I wanted to hear every word. Every desperate syllable I had once dreamed of hearing, back when his silence was the thing that hurt most. "I was wrong," he said, the words spilling out in a rush. "I was so wrong. I was stupid. I thought you were just some dependent woman, but now I know. You were the one holding everything together. You were the reason my life didn't fall apart." His breathing hitched. I could hear the sound of someone pacing, falling apart on the other end of the line. "I've lost everything," he went on. "The house, it's being foreclosed. I can't make the payments. The company didn't just fire me, Caitlin. They blacklisted me. No one will hire me. Please give me another chance." I opened my eyes and stared at the faint glow of the nightlight by my bed. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of the Ford pump beside me. My voice, when it came, was calm. Steady. Almost detached. "A chance," I repeated softly. There was a pause, the kind that stretches long enough to make the truth sting. "Brandon," I said finally, "you didn't lose everything because of me. You lost it because you never learned to build anything on your own." He didn't speak. I could hear him breathing, shallow, ragged, defeated. You once told me I was weak, I continued, my tone like glass, clear and unbreakable. But now you know what real strength looks like. It's not in control or money or pride. It's in surviving, even after people like you are gone. I reached for the phone, my fingers brushing the cold metal edge. Goodbye, Brandon, I said quietly. I hope you find the man you were supposed to be, somewhere beyond my shadow. And with that, I ended the call. The silence that followed wasn't heavy this time. It was peaceful. For the first time in years, I felt free. You had a whole decade, Brandon, I said quietly, my voice steady but sharp enough to cut through the silence. A whole decade to respect me, to love me, to share, to understand. And you chose not to. I took a slow breath. Now that everything you were used to is gone, now you realize my worth. But it's too late. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then, his voice, trembling, heavy with regret, filled the quiet. I know you're angry, Caitlin, he whispered. But we were happy once. Please, remember those times. I'm begging you. A faint, almost sad smile touched my lips. My fingers tightened around the phone. Brandon, I said softly, do you remember the name Alyssa? For a moment, all I could hear was silence. Then, a sharp intake of breath. How did you find out about that, he stammered. My tone turned to steel. The CEO of Vital Tech called me personally to apologize, I said evenly. He mentioned there had been an internal investigation, a quiet one. Turns out you had a personal relationship with your new intern. Alyssa Morgan. 24 years old. Daughter of the Chicago branch director. I let the words linger, each one deliberate. Should I go into detail about those late overtime nights? Brandon's voice cracked, desperate. No, Caitlin, it's not what you think. It wasn't like that. You're right, I interrupted. It was worse than I thought. And with that, I ended the call. No hesitation. No tears. Then, without another word, I opened my contacts list, found his name, and pressed block. That small click felt like the final seal on a chapter that had already ended long ago. Afterward, I drafted a short email to my attorney, requesting a no-contact clause be added to the divorce proceedings, and authorization to file a civil suit for breach of marital duty. In the state of Minnesota, infidelity isn't just betrayal, it's grounds for emotional damages. And I had evidence. Plenty of it. The next morning, my lawyer, Eliza Harper, arrived at the hospital. Her expression was calm, but her eyes carried a quiet storm. She placed a neat folder on the side table beside my bed. We've gathered everything, she said. Screenshots, message logs, even hotel records. The HR department at Vital Tech forwarded digital evidence before deleting it from their servers. I reached for the folder. Inside were photos and screenshots, Brandon's name alongside Alyssa's in chat threads, flirtatious messages, hotel check-ins, selfies taken right inside the Vital Tech office. All time-stamped. All geotagged. I didn't flinch. I didn't even feel shock. Just a strange, cooling sense of relief. Every uneasy instinct I'd buried for years finally had a face. A name. A truth. Eliza closed the folder gently. I've sent a formal demand for $85,000 in emotional damages, she said matter-of-factly. He'll probably contest it, but with this evidence, the court will rule in your favor. I nodded slowly. Not because I cared about the money, but because for the first time in years, my dignity was exactly where it belonged. A week later, I was discharged from the hospital, temporarily, for at-home monitoring. My body was still fragile, but my spirit had never been stronger. During those first few days, Brandon tried everything to reach me. He sent endless emails, filled with half-apologies and promises to do better. He spammed my social media accounts with messages disguised as remorse. Once, he even showed up at the headquarters of Silver Med, unaware that I had already given explicit orders to security. He was not to be allowed within 100 feet of the building. Every attempt, every desperate gesture, only confirmed what I already knew. Brandon didn't love me. He simply didn't know how to live without me. That realization didn't sting, it freed me. I began rewriting my life from the ground up. My financial planner looked different now, no more husband's allowance, no more joint mortgage or shared expenses. Just me. My future. My peace. I also approved Eric's proposal to transition the COO position to a new hire. He had been managing the company flawlessly in my absence, and I trusted him completely. It was time for me to step back, breathe, and rediscover what it meant to live, not just survive. When I finally moved into my new home, it felt like shedding an old skin. Gone were the walls that had witnessed years of silence, resentment, and cold arguments. The new place overlooked the lake, quiet and wide, with sunlight pouring through open glass doors. That evening, I stood on the balcony, letting the cool breeze sweep across my face. My hair, short now, still growing back from treatment, lifted gently in the wind. For the first time in a long while, I felt whole. I didn't need a man to make me feel worthy. I didn't need validation or approval or someone to complete me. All I needed was myself, strong, clear-headed, and never again allowing anyone to define who I was or what I could become. Meanwhile, the rumors about Brandon's downfall spread through the business community like wildfire. Vital Tech's board had not only cut ties with Silver Med, but had quietly circulated his termination file to their partner network, a subtle warning wrapped in professionalism. In the industry, reputation was everything. Within weeks, Brandon Scott had become a name people whispered about, not with respect but with disdain. A logistics coordinator caught in scandal. An employee dismissed for misconduct and marital infidelity. The man who lost everything because he underestimated the wrong woman. With no home to return to, the one he once claimed as ours, now legally mine, Brandon moved in with an old college friend in a worn-down apartment complex in Brooklyn Park. A few weeks later, I heard through quiet channels that he had sold his car, the sleek black one he once called his symbol of freedom. The money, ironically, went straight toward paying off credit card debt, the same cards he had maxed out on luxury meals, gaming equipment, and sneakers he didn't need. The professional world had turned its back on him. No one wanted to hire a man with a tainted record, no management experience, and no humility left to start over. He had finally reached the same emptiness he once left me in. But the difference was, I rose from it. He stayed there. Eventually, Brandon was forced to face reality. With his reputation shattered and every opportunity slipping away, he accepted a night shift job at a delivery center, a far cry from the confident man who once boasted about his career stability. The paycheck barely covered his rent. Bills piled up. Calls from collection agencies came day and night, echoing through his small apartment, each ring a reminder of everything he had lost. They weren't calls from friends or loved ones, but from creditors, demanding what little he had left. And as for Alyssa, the young intern who once giggled beside him during late-night office hours, she disappeared almost overnight. Her social media accounts were deleted within days of the scandal breaking. I hadn't thought much about her until Eliza, my lawyer, mentioned the matter during a follow-up meeting. Alyssa's family had quietly agreed to settle part of the damages privately, eager to avoid public litigation. Rumor had it her parents took her back to their farm in Iowa and cut all ties with her former life, an attempt to salvage what was left of their family's reputation. And just like that, both of them, Brandon and Alyssa, became shadows in the story I no longer belonged to. My final treatment ended on a crisp autumn morning. When the doctor smiled and said, "Your test results show you're completely clear." I didn't speak. I simply smiled and squeezed his hand gently. That was the moment I felt reborn. 2 months later, I returned to work. But I wasn't the same Caitlin who once tried to balance a demanding career and a loveless marriage. I walked into the Silver Med headquarters lighter, calmer, a woman who had finally reclaimed her own life. The company surprised me with a small welcome gathering. When I entered the main conference room, everyone stood and clapped. Eric, ever composed, stepped forward with a mug in his hands that read, "Welcome back, boss." I laughed, genuinely this time. For a moment, I remembered the Caitlin who once doubted whether she could start over. And then I realized, I hadn't just come back. I had come back stronger than ever. In the months that followed, invitations began to arrive, dinner offers from business partners, messages from old friends who had heard about my story online. But I politely declined them all. Not because I had closed my heart, but because I finally understood something deeper. I didn't need anyone to complete me. I still needed time, to heal, to breathe, to enjoy the serenity I had fought so hard to create. I bought a small lakeside home in Duluth, far from the noise of the city. It wasn't extravagant like the old house, but it was mine, peaceful, grounded, and filled with light. Each morning, I watched the sun rise over the water. Each evening, I listened to the quiet melody of the birds and the wind brushing through pine trees. One weekend, Eric stopped by. We sat together on the porch, cups of tea in hand, the golden reflection of the lake rippling before us. He glanced at me with a playful smile. "So," he asked lightly, "have you thought about getting married again?" I met his gaze, smiling softly. "Not right now," I said. "Maybe someday. But for now, I'm happy like this." He nodded, understanding without needing another word. The breeze carried the scent of pine and damp earth. In that still, perfect moment, I realized I hadn't just survived Brandon or the illness. I had survived the silence. The years of shrinking myself to make someone else comfortable. The fear of being alone. As I took another sip of tea, I thought quietly to myself. In the end, I became the one who wrote the final chapter of my story. From my journey, I learned that resilience isn't born from strength, it's born from the moments when life breaks you, and you choose to rise anyway. I once gave my heart to someone unworthy. I once sacrificed my peace for love that never deserved it. But now I live for myself, fully, freely, unapologetically. Because true happiness began the day I chose to place my self-respect above everything else. Sparkles, what did you think of Caitlin's journey and her decision to rise above it all? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to follow the channel for more powerful, real-life stories of courage, healing, and self-worth.